And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Stripe Dev Chats. My name is Cecil Phillip, and with me today I have my co-host Charles. And today we're going to be learning about some cool stuff. We're going to be learning about how we could use Stripe to accept in-person payments with a really cool product called Stripe Terminal. And of course, we have a very special guest who's going to talk to us about that today. So, Roshan, why don't you, before we get started, tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do, and what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Very excited to get to talk a little bit about Terminal. So I'm Roshan for those who haven't met or for those who see me for the first time. I work on the Stripe Terminal team as a product manager, and specifically I work on our integration tools. So this is our developer-facing SDKs and APIs. And today we're going to talk a bunch about Terminal, what it is, how to build an integration. We'll even do a live integration live on the stream here. And so give everyone a chance to get to walk through just how easy it is to get up and running. So excited to dive in.
I think this is a really cool topic for us to dive into because even before I joined Stripe, I always thought Stripe was an API, right? Which it is. But then I never really thought about, well, what does that mean for like physical devices, right? I thought about, hey, I can plug it into my web app or my mobile app or whatever software I'm building. But the fact that there is that possibility of having like that, almost like that IoT type experience, like we can actually plug into hardware and accept payments. So I think it's really interesting. So I hope folks really dig what we're going to talk about. But before we do that, as always, we're going to dive into some highlights really quickly. So I'm going to pull up my screen and let's kind of dive into some of the cool highlights that have been going on in the world of Stripe. So first thing we want to talk about is currently right now in beta, we have the new orders API that's available for folks to try out. Again, this is in beta, so that means that things may change. So, tread carefully. But this is just a new way that you can build your custom checkout flows, and it'll do things like automatic tax calculation and all that type of fun stuff for you. I haven't played around with it yet.
I have.
You have? Well,
I have.
Can you talk about it?
Okay.
Like,
So yeah. So here's the thing about the orders API. Like if you've done like a lot of like Stripe integrations before, you know that you have to pass in like the amount, right? And it's just this one thing. But when you think about payments, there's like multiple components. There's like shipping, there's taxes, and then there's structured data around the different products that you're checking out with. So with this orders API, now you can do you can calculate taxes. I think you can calculate shipping as well. And you can do that kind of using some of the primitives from checkout. So like products and prices, and you can pass that in. And it'll calculate it for you. You don't have to go to a third party. You don't have to do it by yourself. The orders API handles it for you. It's really neat.
Okay, so then if I already have a checkout integration, is this something that you would say I would use instead of checkout or on top of checkout?
So I would kind of say that like if you're already using checkout, you're like getting this for free basically. Okay. So I would say if you're using Elements and you wish that you had the automatic tax calculation functionality.
Got it.
That's orders. Yeah.
Nice. So folks, if you want to add some of that really cool functionality to your apps and you're using Elements or even building your own custom workflows, then definitely make sure you check out our new orders API. And of course, there's docs available for you to go ahead and check that out. Now, of course, we said we're going to talk about Terminal today. So we definitely have to highlight some of the content that our team has been creating around the Terminal. So if you head over to the Stripe Developers YouTube channel, you can see that there's a little playlist called Terminal 101, which has a couple of videos right now that'll walk you through how do you start building with a terminal device. So from connecting the reader to actually accepting the payment and even canceling the payment. And I know Charles worked on these, and I'm pretty sure he might be working on some more. No promises, but he might be. And you can take a look at some of these to kind of check out again what it feels like to actually get started with building something with Stripe Terminal. And to kind of keep along with that theme of accepting payments in real life and not just in your web applications or your mobile applications, Charles, again, as you can tell, Charles really loves Terminal. He created a series of blog posts. So in case you don't want to watch a video, but instead you want to read through some samples and some demos and actually see what it actually feels like he has a series of blog posts that'll, again, help you register the device and have you connected to your Stripe account and show you how you could start collecting payments in person using Stripe Terminal. So again, we'll have these links available for you in the description, and also we'll post them in the chat as well. But if you're interested, here's some really interesting resources for you to check out on orders and also Stripe Terminal as well. Now, with that being said, this is the part of the show where I always say this is no longer our show, but this is actually Roshan's show. So my friend, I need you to tell me, why would I want to do this? Like, why is Stripe Terminal such an interesting product, and why do we want developers to actually like start using it?
Yeah, I actually think in some ways it goes back to what you were saying before, where a lot of folks think of Stripe as an API. Terminal, if you want to kind of distill it to its essence of what it is an API for hardware. It's an API for in-person payments. It's an API for moving money when you're physically, talking, interacting with someone in the real world. Right. And so that's kind of what the promise and power of Terminal enables you to do. As for the why side of things, I think there's a lot of use cases. We can spend some more time talking about a few of those, but we tend to see a lot of folks who are doing everything from selling tickets to using Terminal for in-person payments in clinics and hospital settings, all the way to events and just traditional retail, even where there's an opportunity to take what those APIs do for in-person and really powerfully integrate it with the rest of the Stripe stack. And actually, that's something that we'll spend some time on. But basically, this notion that it's all the same APIs under the hood. So you heard Charles talking about, or we talked a little bit about orders, but for example, with payment intents as one of those core Stripe APIs, all of Terminal runs on payment intents. And so if you have that online integration, it's really easy to extend it to in-person. And actually, I'll show you how easy it is in a few minutes when we do it live.
So one of the things that pops into my mind first every time I think about hardware is I'm not the best at C. I don't write C++. Like, every time I know you have to integrate with hardware, you usually have to start talking about how do I plug in like these low-level APIs to start working with hardware. So with this, can I use my existing skills as a JavaScript developer, Java developer, .NET, Python, Go? Can I name your programming language X, except C++, and do this? Is that an option that's available for me?
If you want to use C++, I'm sure you could find a way to make that work.
No hate on C++, folks. Don't get mad at me.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But no, actually, that's a really good question, because that's kind of what we're trying to do with Terminal as a product. Is we're trying to do that heavy lifting for you. And so we do the work to create the application that runs on the reader, for example. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We do the work that kind of interfaces with the hardware. Actually, when you're using a physical card, most of those, at least for the rest of the world, they've been chip cards for a while. Yeah. The US is mostly there, where most of our cards are chip cards now too. But that actual chip interaction is a whole bunch of complexity, right? Like, how do you read the data off the chip, send commands down to the chip? That's all stuff that we take care of for you. And so to answer your question briefly, you pick a language you want, and we have a bunch of supported SDKs and API endpoints, and you can wrap this stuff up in whatever makes the most sense for your application if you wanted to build something. So what was really one interesting way that I think about this is, like, you can actually, to your point, you can use JavaScript to talk to a physical device, which like kind of blows my mind at times when you think about what that can enable. Right. But we've seen a lot of our customers, a lot of our users really been able to take advantage of that. So
nice. Well, I know you brought some demos and slides and all kinds of cool stuff. So why don't we just go ahead and jump into it?
Yeah, would love to. I'm going to start off by just talking a little bit about what Terminal is. And apologies to those who might be already familiar, but thought it would just help, to just make sure we're on the same page and actually kind of address some of those questions you asked us a little bit more detail. And actually, please feel free to jump in, if there's anything I can clarify as I go here. So what is Terminal? Well, the way that I like to think about this is it's three core things. We think really hard about what we call unified payments. And so I talked about this a few minutes ago, but that ability of combining the in-person payment stack with the online payment stack. And we hear consistently from users and customers how important that is to them, having a single payout into their bank account, having a single source of truth for all the transactions and reconciliation and reporting they want to do on their business, having a single integration that actually not just works online and offline, but also works globally, which I'll talk about in a second as well. And so really just that unified stack is a really important part of what we think about. The second pillar is customization. And so obviously we're talking about developer products here, and I can't think of anything more customizable than the building blocks. And that's how we approach what we do on Terminal is I like to say we give Legos. And so we make a set of Legos that allow folks to build your own Lego kits and let your own, things out of those Legos, whatever they may be. Obviously, these are not freeform Legos; they're payments and in-person related Legos. But you can take those to do all kinds of things. You could add Terminal into an existing web app. You could take an e-commerce store you've already built and add a button, and suddenly it can do payments in person. There's really powerful use cases. On the flip side, if you have an iOS app and maybe you're building something like a DoorDash competitor, maybe you could even do in-person payments in that form. And so really just being able to extend, take those Legos, adapt them into your application. And then the third thing here, which I think just is worth calling out as something that Stripe really cares about, is how we design for scale. And so really making sure that we are, it's easy to get started, which hopefully I'll prove today. But then not just easy to get started, but easy to build, grow, and kind of expand the capabilities you might want with something like in-person payments, or the sort of, features you might want and countries you might want to support. So let's spend a few minutes on kind of why we wanted to build Terminal in the first place. And actually, I was looking back at the history. We did a dev chat back, like another YouTube dev chat, I want to say, back in 2019. So it's been many years. And we shared some similar content about sort of why Terminal. And just wanted to re-mention, it's really complex to build your own point of sale stack. We've talked to customers who've tried to go down this route or are going down this route. And the long story short is that it can take months, and not just 3 months or 4 months, but up to 12 or 24 months. And the reason for that is because there are all those moving pieces, right? You have the hardware, you have your own software, you have how do you deal with the chip card, things like that. And beyond that, you also have integrations to the payment processors and sort of all this complexity that comes into play. And so really our goal with Terminal is to take all that away, simplify it, give some really nice, hopefully easily usable APIs. So what we provide on Terminal are these three things. We have developer interfaces, so iOS, Android, JavaScript, and the API, which we also call our server-driven integration. We'll dive into that one today specifically a bit more. We have pre-certified EMV readers. So EMV is the chip card standard, and our readers all work with tap payments, chip payments, as well as swipe.
Okay.
And the certified part here means that we take those long months that it takes to go and make sure we're handling that card data the right way, and we do that work for you. And so there's no certifications needed. Stripe handles all this complexity that you sort of get for free when you use our APIs and SDKs. And then finally, there are tools to manage these devices. So Cecil, you talked about that IoT side of things, and that's where this comes into play. We have APIs to see the status of a reader, whether it's online or offline. I'll actually walk through how you add a new reader to your account. And so that's another example of kind of managing those devices. And you can configure the behavior of those devices, set custom tipping configurations or splash screens or all kinds of other good stuff that I'll allude to in a bit. So that's really what we're focused on. And then, of course, underpinning all this is the security side of things. And we give you a token with Terminal, just like you get a token from Stripe when you build online payments.
So quick question about this part then. Does that mean that if I'm a manufacturer or I'm a hardware company, that I could make my own hardware device and not necessarily have to use the ones that are distributed by Stripe, and I could I could find some way to integrate with these APIs and build my own hardware experience? Or is it a case that Stripe has to create that for me? Can I do that or no?
Yeah, good question. So we can't do that. And the reason for it is because of that certification side of things. And so I can go into the detail if y'all are a bit more curious. But long story short is there's some pretty strict requirements on how you handle in-person card data.
Right.
And so we basically have applications that we run on these devices, and Stripe does the work of making sure that those applications handle that data the right way, and then also send it to the Stripe API the right way. And so, you are locked into our hardware. We think and we hope that there are a variety of hardware offerings here that meet the needs of various form factors and things like that. And happy to share more on that too. Actually, that's a good segue into my next slide. That's the hardware. And so I talked about this a bit ago, but we support contactless payments, Apple Pay, Google Pay, all the mobile wallet options on all of our readers. And we do have a portfolio of hardware here. So there's everything from a mobile device that you can use on the go or in a roaming use case to this larger device, the WisePause E. That's the one I'll be demoing today, but that has a large screen. You can set your own brand on there, kind of customize the colors, the splash screen colors and things like that, and kind of have that be more of a countertop solution that connects over Wi-Fi. So
got it. Cool.
So that's kind of a bit about the hardware. I also was thinking back to what we talked about in 2019, and back then we were in one country. I think we had just launched in the US. Maybe we had launched in Canada. We're now in 15. And so it's been pretty cool to see this growth. We're definitely investing in many more markets for Terminal as well. But the idea here is not just that we're in many countries, it's that it's the same integration. So that's the same payment intents, it's the same SDKs, it's the same APIs under the hood. And what we see with a lot of our customers is that as they start in one place and expand globally, they can pretty easily adapt their integration and not have to do a bunch of extra code or a bunch of extra work in order to go to new countries. So yeah. I just wanted to share about that. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, can I just say that like I had a dev reach out to me because they were building payments in like France, in-person payments, and they were like, the reason I want to do terminal, besides like the APIs and stuff, was like it's so hard to actually like go from one region to the other. There's like so many different considerations, and like if you do terminal, you just do terminal one time, and you can there might be some differences in terms of payment methods, but it's just kind of like done for you for the most part, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are like some local nuances, I'll say. So, for example, here's a fun fact. For those who might not be familiar, in Canada, there's a Canadian debit network called Interac. And actually, the way you do refunds for Interac payments is you have to do them in person. Whereas for most card brands, you can do those online. So let's say I walk into a store and I buy a T-shirt. Usually, if I need to do a refund, we can do that online, Stripe dashboard. Whereas in Interac, you need to do that in person. So like that's some additional code you have to handle, one or two extra API calls in your integration. But for the most part, you're absolutely right. Like it's still a payment intent. It's still a card present payment intent. It's the same sort of core flow, I'd say.
Got it. And so really quickly, we have some questions and stuff popping up in the side of the chat. So Jonathan is asking, when will Stripe Reader M2 support JavaScript and React Native? Roshan, I don't know if you could talk to that really quick.
Yeah, awesome question. So I have some good news and bad news on that one. We don't have plans for Stripe Reader M2 to support JavaScript. And the reason for that is the Stripe Reader M2 connects over Bluetooth and USB. USB support is for Android devices, for using the Android SDK. So the sort of web and USB and web and Bluetooth are an area where we haven't sort of made a ton of investment or done a bunch of investigation. It's a little bit harder for us to support. But React Native is supported now, actually. And it's a great sort of preempt. I was actually going to spend some time talking about that in a few minutes. But yeah, we just launched a React Native beta SDK, I want to say a few weeks ago, and have several folks already live. The docs are public. We can maybe drop a link in the chat just for folks who are interested. But yeah, you can go ahead and get started with React Native today.
All right, cool. And let's talk about these developer tools then.
Totally. Yeah. And so we just started talking a little bit about this. I mentioned the JavaScript SDK and the iOS and Android SDKs. And these are sort of the core client-side SDKs that we build and maintain. And talked a little bit about how JavaScript, this is how you'd want to build a checkout experience in a web browser. This works with our WisePOS E, the device that connects over a local network, and is what we'll often see for customers who maybe already have an e-commerce experience. Maybe you're more familiar with JavaScript. You're using something like React to power your web app, or your favorite JavaScript framework of choice. I'm behind the times maybe on what's popular these days. And that's sort of the go-to option if JavaScript is your preferred language. We also have iOS and Android SDKs. And so if you're building a mobile app, an iPad app, anything that sort of is mobile native, you have the option to use Android and iOS. And these SDKs are a bit more flexible. They give you access to all of our readers. And again, the sort of defining difference is that some of these readers, like that Stripe Reader M2 you see poking out down here, that device connects over Bluetooth and USB. And so the Bluetooth connection to a mobile device, really powerful use case. We have some customers who just clip those readers to the back of their phone, and their store associates roam around and use that as their way they collect payments. So that's kind of the sort of supported SDKs. I did want to mention for a minute that sort of maintain this idea of maintaining a single view of your customers and what these SDKs let you do. So earlier talked about how it's payment intents all the way down. If you're familiar with the Stripe API and customer objects and payment intents, you can associate those things together. So that's something we also enable on terminal. Is you can take a customer object, put it into a payment intent when you create that payment intent, and then your online payments and in-person payments will they'll be visible in the same way in your dashboard, right? And so basically creating that unified view of the sort of customer from both types of ways they pay. But it goes beyond that, right? So refunds is an example that we talked about where you can do an in-person payment and then actually refund that customer through the Stripe dashboard, and it's all sort of that same source of truth.
Nice.
Quick question. I haven't done this before, but could I technically save a card and then, like, let's say I run a gym, right? tap the card? Could I like throw it into a subscription, charge people?
Yeah, that's a really good point. You can totally do that. And in fact, there's a lot of compatibility with Terminal and other Stripe products. And so you could use a terminal reader to save a card, save that card to a customer object, and then later create an invoice, create a one-off charge, create a subscription, sort of whatever you want to do with a saved card that you could otherwise do in Stripe is all possible. But you're just using Terminal as a way to grab the card details up front. So that gym use case is actually one that a few of our users are using, which is pretty cool. So you'll walk into a gym, you'll maybe, say, I want to pay for a 1-day session, and maybe that gym will email you and say, hey, hope you like that session. Do you want to sign up? And they already have your card on file. So yeah, before we go into sort of more of a demo, wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of the newer integrations. So as we talked about a little bit, the server-driven integration is really exciting. This kind of takes the Stripe API and gives you the ability to talk to readers with it. So for the other integrations that I called out earlier, those all connect to the reader locally. So there's either a local network connection or a Bluetooth connection or a USB connection. With the server-driven integration, you actually make an API call to Stripe, and then Stripe sends the API request down to the reader. And we've seen this be really powerful for a couple of reasons. One is it means you can use Terminal no matter what your tech stack is. So to your question earlier, Cecil, if you wanted to write a C++ wrapper on top of this API, you totally could, because it's just RESTful API endpoints, right, using Stripe. And so really powerful to be able to just talk to Stripe and ask something to happen on a reader. And I'm going to show that in a few minutes here. And then the other sort of new-ish thing for us is React Native. So this is currently in beta, as I talked about a minute ago, and we support the ability to use React Native across, as your multi-platform framework here in order to make iOS and Android apps, and these wrap our mobile SDKs. So really excited to see that too.
Nice. I'm really excited to see some code, man. Like I want to see what this thing looks like. Like do you have a terminal on you? Is that something that we could like see you use and run a card through? And
I do. Yeah. Let's go ahead and jump right into that. Actually, have some more content we could share here in a bit if it becomes curious. But I actually came prepared with a Stripe reader of my very own. You can actually get one of these in the Stripe dashboard yourself. Okay. And so actually the easiest way to get a Stripe reader is just by logging into your Stripe dashboard account and going to payments, readers, and you can place an order right there in your dashboard. And this reader is the WisePause E device, which is the device that allows you to connect to the internet. And I mentioned customize. You can actually change the splash screen background right here. We just added support for GIFs, however you prefer to say that.
GIFs.
GIFs. So you can actually add your own GIFs here and make it so that it's an animated background with your own brand and customize that too. And what I'm actually going to do first is just show how you associate this device with your Stripe account. And so what I've done here is just open up my Stripe dashboard. And in my Stripe dashboard, I've gone to payments and readers and locations. I'm in test mode here just because for the purpose of this demo, we'll just test out some stuff.
Yeah.
And I've already gone ahead and created this location just for today. We got the Stripe address in there. And the first thing I'm going to do is register a reader. And so with the registering step, this is just a way for us to make sure that the reader gets associated with your account properly. And on my reader itself, I'm going to go ahead and request a registration code. So the way I do that is I swipe from the left side of the screen and hit settings. And I type in this code, which is in our docs, to be able to generate a pairing code. And you'll see it might be a bit hard to see on the screen, but I get a 3-word pairing code. So I'm going to go ahead and just type that in here, Time, close village. And we'll just call this reader dev chat. Cool. So I'll save that. You'll notice the reader screen is going to start updating a little bit. And that's because the reader will apply some updates. It'll download what it needs to download in order to operate, in this case, in the US. This is where that global stuff comes into play. So if you were to put in a address, internationally, or if you're using Terminal in a different country, we would automatically localize the reader. So let's say you're taking payments in France, we'll download French language configs and everything needed. So it's, again, one less thing for you to worry about, just sort of handles what needs to be handled. We'll make the currency work the right way, all that kind of stuff when you're doing that. So that's kind of what the registration process looks like. And then what I wanted to spend a minute on as well is like, well, okay, what does that mean for collecting payments? And so this is just the Stripe docs where we're looking at our integrations, instructions, and terminal specifically for that server-driven integration. And really, it's a couple of steps. You create a payment intent, you process that payment intent, and then you make sure that it went through. And I'm going to walk through how to do this live, but just wanted to quickly preview. So we'll create a payment intent just using, I'm going to use the Python SDK since that's what I'm most familiar with. We'll create a payment intent here. We'll process that payment intent using this reader. And then we will go forward and verify the reader state. So with that, I'm going to switch over to some code. I know we were talking about wanting to get in there. So let me share that screen with everyone.
All right. And as you're doing that, like we did have another question coming in from YouTube. So our buddy Steve McCardle is here. Every now and again, we put on a show. Steve's asking, how many readers can I add to my Stripe account?
How many? I'm not aware of any limits.
No.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I'd love to know how many you want to add to your Stripe account. Because if there's like a new
all the readers, you could add all the readers.
Yeah, I'd be really excited. Maybe we should have like a Stripe world records for how many readers you've added to your Stripe account.
That's funny.
But yeah, no, there are no realistic limits here. I'd say it's really we have merchants who have thousands I've seen, and that's something that is supported. So
awesome. And then he did have one more question. I want to bring this up really quickly. And he asks, do you ship readers to New Zealand? Do we do that?
Ooh, good question. Let me actually check. So all those countries that I showed earlier are countries where we will ship readers.
Right.
Let me just make sure. I can't remember if New Zealand was on that list. Let me see here.
If we did something like if they went to stripe.com/global, I know that shows where Stripe is everywhere, but would that also include the services too? Or?
Yeah, the best place to go is actually I'll post this in the comments maybe if that works. But if you go to this page, the stripe.com docs terminal regional, you can actually, there's a drop down on that page where you can select what possible countries we support. And that's how I just verified this is I just went in there. I saw New Zealand, and New Zealand is supported. You'll actually see which devices you can use there, and then anything specific to that country. So like earlier we talked about how Canada has some specific requirements. It's all in one place there, so you can just kind of see everything you need to know about that country.
Cool.
Yeah, we do support shipping to New Zealand. And Steve, I saw you also mentioned about 200 readers. That's not a problem. So 200, 2,000, 20,000, we can support that kind of scale.
Nice.
Cool. Okay, cool. So let's kind of walk through the process to collect some money with this thing. So I've already registered the reader. The reader is already ready to go. It's on that splash screen and hanging out waiting for us. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and make a payment intent. And just for as a heads up, I've scaffolded some things here already. I'm just using a virtual environment with Python, and I am going to go ahead and just grab the environment variables I need, and then set my Stripe API key. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. Is just going to be my environment variable. Yeah, and I'm using just the key that I've defined in an end file here, so it should be all good to go. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a payment intent, and I'm just copying and pasting these from our docs. The second thing we're going to do is process that payment intent, and really that's going to, if these steps work the way they should, our reader will light up and prompt the customer for a payment. And so for the payment intent create, you'll notice that there's some terminal specific stuff here. So we're going to make this a card present payment intent. We're going to make the capture method manual. Can talk a little bit more about that. But basically, terminal today requires that you manually capture a payment. So at the end of the transaction, you just fire that extra call to the payment intent and make sure that the funds flow the way you want. And we also get to specify an amount. So I don't know if any of you guys have an amount I should use here. Any favorite numbers?
Let's do 404,042.
400. No,
4,042. Oh, let's just do 42.
Yeah, why
Okay,
not?
let's do that. Okay.
42. Let's do it.
All right. One thing that I will mention is that because this is in test mode, we actually have let me make sure 42 is not a hidden number. So we actually in test mode have this feature where the cents, if you change the value of the cents in the last two digits, it actually trigger a custom response code.
Got
I
it.
learned this the hard
When
way.
it's a decline payment, you could set the end of if you made this 4201, for example, that's going to be a decline. Or if you made this 4203, this would be sort of a different type of decline. I'll actually link that over in the chat as well, just so as you're testing your transactions. But why don't we do $42? I feel like that's
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. So I'm just going to call this my transaction. Let's assign some stuff to variables here, and we'll just print out the transaction ID, which in this case should just be our payment intent ID. And then we can just call this our result maybe. And just, why don't we print out that whole thing too? You'll notice the two things here that I need to pass into the second command are the reader ID and the payment intent ID. And so for the reader ID, I can just grab that from my Stripe dashboard where I just was a minute ago. And so I'm going to grab a reader ID there. And for the payment ID, we just map that to that same variable that I just set up. So let's grab the reader ID first. And for me, that is this ID here. And for this payment intent, all we should be able to do is just transaction.id. Now let's do this stepwise just to make sure it works. So we'll do the first part first, which is just creating a payment intent. So I'll just run this. And cool, we can create a payment intent and we get a payment intent ID down here. That looks super great. We know it's the right ID. We don't need to print that anymore. So let's go ahead and just pass that in here and we'll try the result. Now, what's gonna happen when I run this code is we're gonna create a payment intent. We're gonna pass that payment intent into this Stripe terminal reader process payment intent endpoint. And when we do that, we're telling the Stripe API, I want you to send this payment for $42 to that reader. And that reader is the one that's on my desk right here. So what we should see, assuming that live demos are going to work for me today, is that this reader is going to light up and ask me to pay $42. So I'll go ahead and run this. And you'll see that we created a payment intent. And we don't have a payment yet. That's not great. Let's see what I might be doing wrong here. So we have a reader ID. We have it registered. It's online. And we need to process the payment intent, which we're doing. Okay, let me just
make sure. Are you expecting the terminal that you have there to like, is it supposed to light up or?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the reader here should be receiving that command in order for me to send a payment over to it. And so
okay,
Stripe terminal reader process payment intent. We have the reader ID. Let me make sure I got the right reader ID. Yep. And we're going to make the payment intent the transaction ID.
Can you quickly check your secret key one more time, maybe?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks right. And we were able to create a payment intent. So I think we're doing the right thing here.
Yeah.
Let's try this again. Cool. Okay, that worked. Maybe the reader just wasn't ready for me. But
there you go. Yeah.
I literally didn't change anything. So I guess, yeah, the demo gods were not happy with me a minute ago. Okay, cool. So you'll see what happened here is a couple of things. So the reader is now prompting me for a payment. So you'll see it shows that $42 that we popped in there. And then meanwhile, our terminal has spit out some logging here and returned that reader object. And so the reader object here is a Stripe object that actually represents that physical device. And this actually response, it actually tells you kind of what's going on with that device. So you can see that ID, you can actually see its IP address, you can see the label that I assigned to it, as well as what payment intent it's currently processing. That's that same payment intent ID. So I'm going to do in this case, just grab my reader and insert my card. And when I do that, you'll see the reader will prompt me to remove the card, processing, and approved. And so that's basically the integration. And what we can actually do now is we can take this payment intent ID that we know was just used and double check it in our Stripe dashboard. And so what I'm going to do is let me switch my share here over to that Chrome tab again.
And then as you're doing that, I have another question too.
Yeah.
So what you showed us just now was that you had some integration where you wrote some code, registered a terminal, you initiated a payment from the backend, and then that triggered the terminal to like turn on and process the payment. Is it possible that you can initiate the payment from the device? And I'm thinking, hey, I'm walking around and I'm in a store and Charles walks in, he wants to buy some stuff from me. And I pull out my device. This is not the device we're selling. We pull out a device and he swipes his card, but I'm not at the desk or the computer. I'm like with the hardware in my hand and process it. Like, can we initiate it from this point versus like from the back end to the terminal? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the question definitely makes sense. We don't support that today though. And so that's the thing that we definitely want to do some investigation there and make sure that we are thinking about the best way to do that. But for now, you have to have something else that sends a request down to the payment or down to the reader. So again, it could be like an iOS app, an Android app. It could be, I mean, with the server-driven integration, you could even go kind of crazy and wire something to a physical button that starts the payment. I mean, because it's an API, you can kind of think of anything you want to do there. I know Charles and I have been talking about Airtable. I can't remember if we've done the Airtable one or not, but like there's some cool,
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to be doing a live stream on how to use Terminal with Airtable next week, actually.
Oh, nice.
And I'll post a link to that one. But yeah, you can do some pretty wild things with it.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Like I'm really kind of excited to see all the use cases here.
Nice.
Yeah, so if we want to quickly look at my Stripe dashboard here, you can actually see that payment that I just made, that $42 payment, is showing up in my dashboard. It says that's authorized, not yet captured. We got an approved message, shows that Visa credit card, and actually shows that it was a contact EMV Stripe terminal transaction all in the Stripe dashboard. And if I had, passed a customer object in that payment intent request, then I would see that in my customers tab and kind of, get the full power of the Stripe ecosystem that way. So we could just capture this payment in the dashboard if we want. We can also do that with the API. I'll go ahead and capture it. And so now we're succeeded, and that's our $42. So that's kind of the sort of core flow. It's like, I think it was maybe 30 or 40 lines of code to just proof this out really quickly.
Right.
Obviously, very proof of concept MVP, but kind of the foundation for anything else you could build there.
Yeah, that seems pretty easy. And I love the fact that, like earlier you mentioned, hey, you can have like experiences in like these different places like web and mobile, but then you can also tie in this hardware experience also. And then through the Stripe dashboard, I'll just have like a unified experience for everything. So it's not like, some of the money's over here and some of the money's over here. And it's like all over it's not like spread out in fragments, and like it's in a centralized place. And I could do my reporting, and I could, look at the trends and my purchases and all that stuff for my customers in one place. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's one of the things that we hear pretty consistently from users is that, having it all in one place, having it all kind of tied together versus having to manage, two different systems and things like that. So
one question I do have based on what, even based on that demo that we saw just now, was it looked like you ran the code and the terminal took like a second to respond. Mm-hmm. And so, as every software developer knows, like the network is unreliable, hardware fails, batteries die, like stuff happens, right? And so it might leave us in a state where we're halfway through a transaction or halfway through an operation. Does the terminal API handle things like, like transient errors? Again, like I initiated a thing and like the error failed, and are they like retries and things of that nature built into it? Like what's way to protect the developer from like bad stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have a couple ways to do that. Long story short is yes, we do as much as we can to make sure you're not going to hit those edge cases. Mm-hmm. So actually what happens, when I built that integration quickly, I made this process payment intent call. And that's the call that sort of turned on the reader, if you will, and showed the $42 amount. This call is actually synchronous, and we return a 200 from the API from Stripe if we're able to reach the reader. So basically, if you get a 200 OK from this call, that's a guarantee that we sent the payment down to the reader.
Got it.
And then the step of actually understanding when the payment is completed, that's actually asynchronous. And so with the server-driven integration, we actually recommend that you listen to webhooks in order to know when a payment completed. And so I'm not going to scroll. I don't need to like go line by line in the docs here. We actually have a couple of webhook events. I can actually show you those that they did fire when I ran this transaction just now. Yeah. And these webhook events will be fired if the reader payment succeeded or if it failed. And a failure is like a decline type case. And the reason for this is like maybe a customer is fumbling around with their credit card, or they're like talking to the cashier or store associate, and we didn't want to hold open a connection for that whole time. And so we just immediately tell your app, yes, we got the request. It's down to the reader. And you then can kind of listen for any updates from that reader device and kind of pretty instantaneously tell when that transaction was approved.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. I got another question from Jonathan. Can this be done in a platform? So like Stripe Connect for a client?
Yes, it can. And actually, I will say very many of Terminal's users today, they are platform users. Nice. And so what they're doing is they're actually taking Terminal and distributing it to their customers. So an example of this is a company like Shopify or Lightspeed, where they're a platform that's building an integration with Stripe. Then they work with a bunch of small businesses, retailers, restaurants, whoever. And they're actually, asking Stripe to ship terminals down to their customers. That's something we can do for you, or they're shipping it themselves. And based on their integration, they're able to do everything they could do with Connect. So you can do direct charges, destination charges. You can support standard connected accounts, custom connected accounts, express connected accounts, like all the funds flows you can do with Connect work with Terminal out of the box too. So,
speaking of shipping like readers, like what does that look like? So if you want to get one reader, you can get in a dashboard, but like earlier you mentioned something about logistics. What's the story there?
Yeah, great question. So, and there was another question earlier today too, where asking about sort of support for different countries. So the way we view this on the Terminal team is if we're launching a new country, it's a requirement for us to be able to ship devices anywhere in that country, because we know, it's kind of a pain to have to buy a bunch of devices, then ship them out where they need to go, and then return them back and do all that kind of stuff. So we actually have a sort of fully managed drop shipping product, if you want to call it that, where you can actually ask Stripe to ship a reader wherever you want us to. And so in any country where we're supported, for whatever readers we support there, you'll actually see this in our docs too. We will ship to any address in that country, any valid address in that country. So if you go into the dashboard and say, I want to ship a reader out to Cecil, who's starting his new, lemonade stand or whatever it is.
I really like lemonade.
They're perfect. All right. The reader will show up in the mail. You set it up with whatever app I give you, and you're ready to go. And then actually, if we actually also do have an API for that we keep sort of as a gated feature. But if you're interested in that, let me know, and we can maybe figure out a way to give access. But yeah, so that's kind of the logistics side of things. And we also offer, next day shipments if you need those, some statuses in the dashboard, things like that to be able to track the status of an order.
All right, cool. Yeah, this looks amazing. And I think what really got me with what you've shown us so far is that it's really not that much more code that we were writing normally, right? Like it actually seems like a very minimal amount of code to be able to get that done. Now, as a developer, like one of the things that I care about is, obviously, like we talked about like the resiliency and the ability to handle failures. But what does it look like for me testing it out? Like, so obviously you're testing it out. You have, a reader and a fake card and those types of things. But like what happens if I have like my CI/CD system or something like that? Like, is it a case of, I don't know, I might have to have my server plugged into a terminal, or like how do I think about these things? Or is there like a virtualized system or product that I could use that can help me with some of those types of scenarios?
There actually is. And I guess I keep sharing different screens and going back and forth.
That's fine.
Let me show you what I'm thinking of here. So we actually support what we call simulated readers. And so what these allow you to do is simulate kind of what it says in the tin, simulate what a reader might behave like. So in this case, we have this location here where I registered a real reader. We could also register a simulated one. And there's actually a special code for that. So if you could do this today in your Stripe account, type in simulated-WPE. WPE is the abbreviation for the WISE-POSE. Yeah. And we can just call a simulated reader. You can see I tried this the other day. And we'll save that. And you'll notice that this reader automatically gets added. It has this sort of UUID serial number, but more importantly, it has a real looking terminal reader ID.
Oh, nice.
And so this ID actually is a real ID that we can use in the API. And maybe just to show how this would work, you can actually pretty quickly incorporate this into that script that we just wrote. So here we had started in my VS Code window here, I'd started with kind of defining this transaction and then sending this transaction to a reader. I just grabbed that simulated reader ID from the dashboard, and this is that simulated reader. What we can do is actually we have a special set of API methods that let you test the physical reader part. So in this case, if you remember, this is where I'm sending the payment down to the actual reader itself. With a simulated reader, it's all software, so there's no actual physical reader involved. So what I can do instead is I can use this test helpers endpoint. And what the test helpers endpoint does is it lets me pretend that a customer tapped or inserted their card on this simulated reader. And in fact, I can also pass in a special reader ID, or a special card number here. So in that testing page that we linked earlier, if you wanted to test a decline, for example, you could just pop in a decline card. So I think this is a decline card. So if I do this, let's see if the demo gods are kind to me again. What's going to happen is we'll create a payment intent, just like we would in test mode otherwise. We'll send it to the simulated reader. And actually, if we look at what happens when we send it to the simulated reader, it's a little small. Let's see if I can zoom in. We'll see that the simulated reader, the card was declined. And that's what we expect because we passed in this declined card ID. So if
Right.
you pass in, if you don't put this in, you get it would succeed. You can pass it. We have 10 or 15 different cards you can use to simulate, different things here. This is what I would recommend if you want to build this into your CI suite, right? Because you can hit this as much as you want. Like you can actually, we have a lot of customers who will kind of run CI on against terminal stuff if this is a core part of their stack. And so this is the easiest way to do that. This is for the server-driven integration. We also have simulated readers for iOS, JavaScript, and Android. So if you're using one of those SDKs, there's stuff in our docs as to how to set that up and how to use it. But yeah, those are all also options too. So
Nice. I think what's also great about that experience too is that it means I could start playing with the terminal APIs before my terminal gets there. So it's not a blocker in me continuing to build out my integration. I could start it out, and like you said, we could have those different test cards or those different response types that we could react to. I'm guessing those would trigger out those different webhooks as well. So we could work on our integration, we could work on our webhooks, we could try out these different scenarios, and then when the actual device is physically in possession, then we could actually do that as well and make sure that those things are working too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like what you could do is you could start with this test helpers endpoint, and then basically when you're ready to use a real reader, you comment this out, you swap this to the real reader, and you probably want to actually have a variable here instead of the way I'm doing it. But and then you're suddenly working with a real reader. And the only difference is what this code block is doing is it's tapping or presenting the card physically to the device. Where if you don't have one of these test cards, then you can just do that in code. So
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple of folks have asked me this question. So I don't know the answer, so I'm going to ask you the question. A few months ago, Apple had made an announcement about, I think it was tap to pay, right? And how you allow like the NFC chip within your Apple device, I'm guessing your iPad and your iPhone and stuff like that, to be able to receive payment and not just pay people, right? So now we can go in both directions with Stripe. Is that in any way, shape, or form related to terminal, or is that like a completely separate thing altogether?
Yeah, it is related to terminal. We're super excited about this, but don't have much we can share quite yet. And so as that comes together, you will definitely be hearing about it. And yeah, maybe we'll do another one of these and talk about how that integration works. But for now, it's getting sort of out there is how I'll say it. So,
okay, awesome. Yeah. I feel like I was digging into the secret sauce a little bit. We can talk about that later.
It's super exciting stuff. I'll agree. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So, is there anything else that you think we should know about terminal? I think we saw the test cards. We saw the physical device. We saw how we can write like this really, not a lot of code. We can write an integration here with Python. You also mentioned we can write the name your programming language X, right?
Totally. Yep.
We saw the
one last
dashboard.
thing I'll mention is sorry. Well, the one last thing I'll mention is that there's a lot of stuff that we're working away at. And so I mentioned new countries, but beyond that, there's a bunch of new features that are coming down the pike here for us. So I mentioned React Native earlier. Actually, just the other day, yesterday, I want to say, we just started support for offline mode in our iOS SDK with our mobile readers. And that's been a really common and top ask from our customers as to how they can operate when maybe their internet connection goes down. And so really excited to get more folks into this beta. If you're interested, you can sign up or let us know. We are also that server-driven integration that I mentioned. We're expanding that to Canada very shortly, and then the rest of the world, soon after that. And we have a bunch of other features here that we didn't get a chance to dive into. But you can collect tips on the readers. You can save cards, as Charles mentioned. You can do refunds. You can make receipts. You can actually display the items on this screen. You can do incremental and extended authorizations, which are pretty common for rental cars and hotels to be able to hold a card for longer. We also mentioned some of the Connect stuff. So yeah, I would just say if you're interested, definitely check out these docs. If there's like one thing that I think would be cool, is just if you do integrate or use these docs, like feel free to reach out to me or one of the folks. I guess you guys would be open to that too, hopefully.
For sure.
Love the feedback. Love to hear what's painful about the integrations, what's not, what you like, what you didn't. We're always iterating based on what we hear. So would love to hear any feedback.
Yeah, it looks like we got another question, again, coming in from YouTube. And this is from, Khalil Khan. I hope I said your name correctly. After the POS application and reader have been idle for a long time, we sometimes get a network timed out. Unexpected disconnect error. That looks like an iOS type error, just based on like the shape of it. How can that be handled? So I think we talked a little bit about error handling and stuff like that a little bit a while ago, but like, is there anything specific that you could share with how to just generally handle like network timeouts and those types of things?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on which reader you're using. So if you have the chance to share that in the comments, I can provide some more specific guidance. But with the WisePause E device, it's actually expected that this thing disconnects once every night. So you're meant to leave this device plugged in. But PCI, which is the sort of card security standards, actually require that we reboot the device every night. And so it's expected that you'll see a disconnect sort of every night around midnight, and then the next morning when folks start back up, they'll reconnect. And so if that is what you're seeing, then that's pretty expected. If you're seeing sort of sporadic disconnects, the best way to handle that is that we send that unexpected disconnect method or delegate, depending on which SDK you're using, to your application. And usually it means either a local network issue where there's a Wi-Fi flakiness or something like that, that prevents your application from reaching the device. In that case, what I typically recommend is just checking the sort of quality of the network. Usually with this device, I'd suggest using Ethernet, which we support with a dock. Ethernet tends to be a lot more stable than Wi-Fi, for an example, things like that. And then on Bluetooth, sorry, I didn't see, do we get a device type?
Yeah, he says it's a WisePause E.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so with the WisePause E, it's usually a flaky network situation, which I know is a generic term. But the best course of action is to check and make sure that there's nothing on the network or in your Wi-Fi logs or router logs that's causing that device to unexpectedly disconnect. And then one other thing I'll mention is that the server-driven integration does give you a little more guarantee there because, I mentioned when you process the payment, you get a 200 from the Stripe API. That means we were able to reach the reader. And so if you are seeing some of those local network issues, one option you could consider is trying that server-driven integration. And seeing if that, makes the communication to the reader a bit easier. But yeah.
Cool. All right. And if anyone that's still watching, if there's any questions that you'll have for Roshan or Charles or even myself, we're all available on social media. I think if you look underneath our names, you see our handles. You can reach out to us on Twitter and LinkedIn and all the social things that we have. And hopefully you try out Stripe Terminal. There's great docs there. We saw a few samples of what some of the docs look like with diagrams and, code samples and all those types of things. Definitely take a look at our docs. We have quick starts there that are available for those things. Choose your language. As you can see, there's Python, there's Ruby, there's .NET, there's all kinds of stuff. So I think the goal here is really just to make this as simple as we can for you to plug in these hardware experiences and those in-person payment experiences inside of your application. So again, hopefully you all try it out. Hopefully you love it, or at least like it a little bit and continue to use it. And if there's any feedback at all, definitely let us know because we'd love to hear it from you. So with that said, we don't have any more questions right now. So Roshan, do you have anything that you'd want to leave us with? Like after folks leave here today, what do we want them to do? Like what is your particular call to action? What are some of the things that you want us on our audience to kind of try out?
Yeah, we'll definitely let you know as stuff comes to Canada and new features are coming up. I saw that comment just cycle in right now.
That's funny.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is share. Please share what you're building. My DMs are open on Twitter, and I love to hear from folks. And if you run into issues or want some help integrating, I'll do as much as I can to help personally. And so feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Please share what you're building. We love in a lot of our meetings on the team. We love to feature what folks are building and even cool open source stuff we see out there related to Terminal. So would love to get any of that stuff brought into the team. And then finally, what I'll mention is, we're particularly looking for feedback on React Native and server driven right now.
Right.
So those are areas where you have a chance to play with it, build some stuff, help us, figure out what we should be doing differently, what we could be doing better. Those are areas where we'd love some feedback too. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I guess, folks, that's a wrap, right? I guess we can call this a day. So, Roshan, thank you so much, man. I feel like you've given us so much to think about and so much to play around with. I know I have some demos that I think I want to go add some Stripe terminal support to it too and kind of just play around with it and see what it feels like. So, I'm definitely excited to go ahead and try this out.
Yeah, my favorite, maybe on a fun note to end with, my favorite recent hackathon project was I took a Notion database. I love using Notion for a bunch of personal sort of knowledge management, and hooked into the Notion API and made a lightweight point of sale where I typed in a transaction amount and it got sent to a reader and I could actually pay with a reader and Notion would update with the status. And I think that's just kind of a good example of the power of an API like this. And so, yeah, I have a lot of other side projects I'm thinking of working on too now that we have this live.
Nice. And
Awesome.
Charles, I know you've played around with this too, right? Like I know you played
my
around with
goodness.
this more than I have. So I know you probably got some cool stuff going on.
Roshan knows. I've done my fair share of Stripe integrations, and the server-driven integration is definitely like one of my favorite. There's so many different things that you can do because it's just a RESTful API. You know, very easy to use. Uses all of the primitives that you're accustomed to. So if you've done any Stripe development, it kind of rhymes with in-person and online integration. It's very, very similar. So I think it's pretty cool stuff.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, I think, like I said, I think that's going to be it, right? So thank all of you for watching. Roshan, thank you for being here. And I hope you all tune in another 2 weeks. We'll have another Stripe dev chats. We'll have more guests talking about all the cool things you can do with Stripe. So that being said, thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.